Ladies and gentlemen, today I invite you to look beyond the headlines, the sanctions, and the military maneuvers, because what we are witnessing is not just a geopolitical stalemate, it is a spiritual revelation. The reason the West cannot defeat Iran is not found in Washington's policies or Tehran's missiles, but in something far deeper, far older, and far more prophetic. Iran is not a nation easily explained by modern categories. It is the ancient Persia of Scripture, mentioned in the book of Daniel and the visions of Ezekiel. This is a land with a divine role in the latter days. Its resistance is not merely national pride. It is rooted in a spiritual identity that stretches back thousands of years. And what makes this nation so enduring? It is the power of belief. While Western societies are shaken by division, Iran is united by ideology. Their leaders may be controversial, but their followers are deeply committed. They are willing to suffer, to wait, and if needed, to die for a vision bigger than themselves. This is not a conventional enemy. This is a force that does not fear death because it believes in destiny. We must also understand Iran's unmatched strategic brilliance. While other nations wage war in headlines, Iran fights in the shadows. In Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, even in Yemen, Iran's influence spreads through proxies, not parade. It fights with patience, it wins without invasion, but there's something else, something holy. Iran has not been overthrown because prophecy has not yet released it for judgment. God, in His sovereignty, has held back the tides of Western power, because Iran is being preserved for a role it must still fulfill. This is not about military failure, it's about divine restraint, and perhaps most alarming to the Western world is the moral gap. Iran's conviction, no matter how misapplied, is unwavering. In contrast, the West falters in identity, flails in morality, and fails in unity. When moral confusion meets religious certainty, the result is not victory, it is delay, frustration, and bewilderment. This is why the West cannot defeat Iran, not because the West is weak militarily, but because it is unarmed spiritually, and until the battle shifts from bullets to beliefs, from policy to prophecy, from confusion to clarity, this ancient nation will continue to stand. Iran's unbreakable resistance to Western domination cannot be understood without turning to its deep prophetic and historical foundations. Unlike many modern nations born out of colonial lines or recent revolutions, Iran's identity is intertwined with ancient Persia, kingdom that not only shaped empires but played a visible role in biblical prophecy. When examining Iran's resilience, one must consider more than politics or military strength. Iran believes it is chosen for a larger, divine narrative. In the book of Daniel, Persia is named as a pivotal power in the succession of empires that would influence the destiny of Israel and the world. Daniel's visions specifically mention the kings of Persia, whose actions would ripple into the last days. Persia's support for the Jewish people during their return from Babylonian exile under King Cyrus is more than a historical footnote. It signals that Iran's prophetic significance began long before its modern Islamic identity. This deep-rooted belief in divine calling is not lost on today's Iranian leadership, who view their national identity as one ordained to stand firm against global hegemony. Iran does not see itself merely as a country, it sees itself as a custodian of destiny. This belief is embedded in both its Shiite theology and its cultural memory. In Shiite eschatology, Iran plays a central role in preparing the way for the coming of the Mahdi, the awaited savior. Unlike secular governments that operate through diplomacy and power dynamics, Iran's ruling class views global conflict, especially with Western powers, through an apocalyptic lens. They believe confrontation is not only inevitable but necessary. This frames every sanction, every threat, and every attempted isolation not as oppression, but as confirmation of their divine path. This spiritual framework is what gives Iran a level of endurance that confounds its enemies. Nations may falter under economic collapse, civil unrest, or diplomatic isolation, but Iran endures. It adapts, survives, and even thrives under pressure, because its people are taught from childhood that suffering is part of their sacred duty. They are heirs to a long prophetic timeline that stretches from ancient kings to the coming end times. This belief fuels a culture of patience and martyrdom, a willingness to suffer if it means fulfilling God's will. Furthermore, Iran's resistance is not passive. It is active, strategic, and guided by the belief that they are resisting not just governments, but godless systems. The Western world, viewed by Iranian leadership as morally bankrupt and spiritually dead, represents everything their prophetic narrative warns against. Iran's unyielding stance, then, is not about defiance for defiance's sake. It is about alignment with what they believe to be a divine script. This explains why no amount of pressure, be it military strikes, cyber warfare, or economic sanctions, can truly break their will. The West is attempting to defeat a nation that does not derive strength from resources or alliances, but from a vision rooted in sacred prophecy that has already foretold its survival and role in the final chapters of human history. Military conquest has long been the language of superpowers, but Iran speaks a different dialect, one shaped not by force alone, but by fierce ideology. While the West relies on technology, firepower, and sanctions, Iran operates on belief, conviction, and theological purpose. This distinction is not merely tactical, it is existential. Iran's greatest strength lies not in the size of its army, but in the power of its world, one that weaponizes ideology more effectively than any missile system. Ideological warfare is not fought with tanks or warplanes. It is fought with meaning, symbolism, and a vision of life and death. Iran's ideology, deeply embedded in Shiite Islam, teaches that resistance against tyranny is not only permitted but sacred. The West often misunderstands this motivation, assuming that every nation can be subdued through pressure or isolation. But Iran doesn't see submission as survival, it sees martyrdom as glory. That mindset reshapes the battlefield. When your adversary believes death leads to divine reward, threats of destruction lose their sting. Iranian leaders have infused generations with this identity. Children are taught not just national pride, but a spiritual mission to stand against Western dominance, Zionism, and the moral collapse of the world. It's not a temporary narrative, it's a lifelong indoctrination. Their society is saturated with remembrance of martyrs, resistance heroes, and the dream of Islamic revival. The idea is to build an immune system of the soul, resistant to compromise, allergic to foreign domination, and immune to defeatist thinking. This ideological approach also allows Iran to influence far beyond its borders. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen, Iran exports more than weapons. It exports a worldview. Militias don't just receive training or funding, they adopt Iran's vision of regional transformation and religious struggle. The West sees rogue actors, Iran sees disciples. That's why Tehran's reach is so expansive. It doesn't conquer nations, it converts movements. Its greatest victories are invisible. The slow infiltration of thought, loyalty, and shared theological destiny. Even within Iran, despite political oppression and economic hardship, the regime's survival is tied to its ideological grip. While protests arise and dissent simmers, the core remains unshaken because it is fused with divine purpose. This is not simply a dictatorship holding power. It is a belief system fortified by centuries of religious tradition, wrapped in national pride, and reinforced by perceived injustice. To many Iranians, resistance is not just political, it's personal, it's identity. This is why the West, with all its might, struggles to break Iran's hold. Bombs can destroy buildings, but they cannot dissolve ideas. Sanctions can crush currencies, but they cannot touch belief. Propaganda can shift opinions, but it cannot unseat conviction that is rooted in eternity. The West is engaged in a battle of bullets and broadcasts, but Iran is waging a war of spirit and sacrifice. This is a conflict where resolve matters more than resources, where faith outlasts firepower, and where the greatest weapon is not what you launch, but what you believe. Iran's ability to withstand external pressure and internal upheaval is not a modern anomaly. It is the legacy of an ancient empire that has repeatedly risen, adapted, and survived where others have vanished. While many nations draw their strength from current alliances or fleeting economies, Iran's backbone is cultural memory, an enduring identity shaped over thousands of years through conquest, resistance, survival, and renewal. The Iranian psyche is not built for surrender, it is trained by history to persist. As ancient Persia, Iran was once one of the most formidable empires on earth. Under Cyrus the Great, it established a dominion based not only on military strength, but also on tolerance, administration, and civil infrastructure. The Persian Empire was one of the first to understand the power of uniting diverse peoples under a single vision. That vision has never been fully extinguished. Even after the empire fell to Alexander the Great, the Persian cultural core remained intact. Foreign rulers came and went, Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, but none erased the Persian spirit. Instead, Iran absorbed the conqueror's methods, repurposed them, and reasserted its own identity again and again. This long history has forged a national consciousness that sees hardship not as a threat, but as a test. For Iranians, suffering is not strange. It is familiar, even expected. They have endured invasions, imposed monarchies, colonial manipulations, wars, and sanctions. But each time they have preserved something deeper than politics, a collective self, understanding that they are heirs to something ancient, resilient, and divinely significant. The Islamic Republic of Iran, though formed in 1979, rests on foundations far older than the revolution. Shiite Islam, particularly in the Iranian context, merges theology with historical trauma and perseverance. The memory of Karbala, the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, and the long lineage of suffering imams is etched into the national soul. These stories have taught generations of Iranians that enduring pain with purpose is nobler than compromise. It is a deeply embedded ethic of struggle, an ethic that rulers weaponize, but one that the people have internalized for centuries. Even when facing economic despair, international isolation, or internal unrest, Iran does not fracture like other states might. It bends, recalibrates, and regroups, because it is built on a cultural rhythm of loss and return, collapse and reconstitution. The West sees obstacles that should cause collapse, but Iran sees only another cycle. That is the strength of a nation with millennia behind it, perspective. A short-term crisis is weighed against a long-term destiny. This culture of endurance makes Iran less reactive and more strategic. It plays the long game because it has been trained by history to think generationally, not just politically. Its patience unnerves faster, moving, shorter-sighted adversaries. It knows that time can erode power, expose weakness, and vindicate those who wait. While others rush for immediate victories, Iran digs in, drawing from a deep well of imperial memory, theological meaning, and generational resolve that no external force has yet been able to extinguish. Iran's geopolitical strategy is not built on direct confrontation, but on the mastery of proxy power and asymmetrical dominance. In the modern battlefield, where conventional warfare often results in global scrutiny and immediate retaliation, Iran has perfected an alternative method, waging influence through indirect means. While traditional powers rely on armies and alliances, Iran thrives in ambiguity, using networks of aligned groups to expand its reach, destabilize its adversaries, and shape regional dynamics without firing a single missile from its own soil. This strategy operates on a foundational principle: don't fight the enemy head on when you can drain them from within. Iran empowers militias, political movements, and non-state actors who serve its ideological and strategic interests across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, and various factions in Syria, all are examples of how Iran extends its influence without bearing the visible costs of war. These proxies are not merely extensions of Iranian policy. They are deeply rooted in local grievances, giving them both legitimacy and longevity. Iran provides funding, weapons, and training, but it also offers something more powerful: a shared vision of resistance against the West, against Israel, and against Sunni Arab governments aligned with foreign powers. Asymmetrical dominance means using what you have to exploit what your enemy lacks. Iran knows it cannot match the West's military technology or economic scale, so it operates in the shadows. It uses cyber warfare, intelligence manipulation, cultural infiltration, and religious networks to undermine stronger opponents. The goal is not always to win outright, but to make victory impossible for others. Iran turns every direct assault against it into a long, grinding battle of attrition. Through its proxies, it stretches out conflicts, drags in international actors, and keeps its enemies bleeding resources and morale. What makes this approach especially effective is that it confuses conventional military logic. Western powers are accustomed to identifying clear targets, defined armies, and measurable victories. Iran's use of proxies makes attribution difficult and retaliation messy. Strike Hezbollah and Iran denies involvement, confront the Houthis and Tehran calls them independent. This creates a fog of war that benefits Iran every time. Moreover, these proxies are not simply puppets. They are ideologically motivated, often seeing themselves as partners in a spiritual struggle rather than clients of a foreign power. This deepens their commitment and makes them more resilient than mercenary forces. Iran's investment in religious and ideological training creates loyal networks that are hard to dismantle because they are not bound by contracts but by conviction. Iran's asymmetrical dominance is not just a regional tactic. It is a model of modern resistance in a world where open warfare has become too costly. It proves that control does not require conquest, and power does not require presence. In today's world, a nation can reshape entire regions without appearing on the battlefield, and Iran has mastered this dark art of warfare through patience, ideology, and strategic entanglement that keeps its enemies perpetually off balance. To understand why Iran remains undefeated despite relentless pressure from the West, one must look beyond the visible realm of politics and into the unseen hand of divine orchestration. Iran is not simply a geopolitical actor. It is a prophetic instrument, preserved not by its own might, but by divine restraint. The forces of history, empires, and warfare have come against Iran, yet none have been permitted to erase it. This enduring existence is not accidental. It is intentional, part of an unfinished script that has yet to play out in full. In the prophetic visions of Daniel and Ezekiel, Persia is not a forgotten empire, but a key participant in the unfolding of end-time events. Daniel was given visions of successive empires, and Persia stood prominently among them. It was under Persian rule that the Jewish people were allowed to return and rebuild the temple, a decision made by Cyrus the Great, a figure so significant that he is mentioned by name in Isaiah. This alone reveals that Persia's role in biblical history is divinely significant, and its survival into the modern era under the name of Iran is no coincidence. Iran's continued defiance against Western domination is not merely a matter of military or political resistance. It is a signal that its prophetic role is not yet complete. This divine restraint, the sovereign act of God holding back total judgment or collapse, explains why Iran has not succumbed despite overwhelming odds. Sanctions have crippled economies, assassinations have targeted top leaders, cyber warfare has attempted to disable infrastructure, and yet Iran remains. Every attempt to break it only seems to harden its resolve. From a spiritual lens, this is not defiance born of pride alone, but preservation decreed from heaven. God is not finished with Iran, and so no power on earth can remove it until his appointed purpose is fulfilled. The language of prophecy is filled with delay, with moments when judgment is withheld so that divine purposes can unfold. Iran stands in such a delay. Its actions, its alliances, and even its enmity toward Israel are part of a prophetic tapestry still being woven. Ezekiel 38 speaks of a coalition led by Gog that will rise against Israel in the last days. While the exact identity of each nation is debated, many scholars include Persia in this coalition. If that prophetic war has yet to happen, then Iran cannot fall prematurely. It must be present, empowered, and ideologically aligned for the final convergence. Divine restraint is not a passive act. It is a sovereign decision to hold back forces that would otherwise be unleashed. This is why attempts to topple Iran fail at the final moment. God's hand is keeping the script intact. The players must remain on stage until the final scene. Iran is being prepared, not defeated. Its survival is not a sign of its invincibility, but of God's intention. The prophetic story is still in motion, and Iran has not yet spoken its last line. The West may grow weary, leaders may grow frustrated, but heaven's clock is ticking according to a timeline not set by generals or politicians, but by the divine author of history. The struggle between the West and Iran is not merely political or military. It is a clash of moral foundations. On one side stands a civilization marked by shifting values, moral relativism, and cultural confusion. On the other side, a nation driven by unwavering religious conviction, spiritual absolutism, and generational clarity about its role in the world. This imbalance is rarely acknowledged in headlines, but it is the core reason the West fails to defeat Iran. The real war is not one of weapons, but of worldview, and in this conflict, the West stands exposed. Iran's leadership operates from a belief system that is not up for negotiation. It is shaped by centuries of Shiite theology, a deep sense of divine destiny, and a vision of resistance that is tied to both spiritual obedience and national identity. This conviction creates a kind of moral armor, an internal certainty that what they are doing is righteous, even sacrificial. When a people believe they are acting on behalf of God, they gain a strength that surpasses fear, calculation, or even logic. That conviction does not bend under pressure, it deepens in the face of opposition. Contrast this with the current moral condition of the West. Once guided by a Christian moral framework that upheld truth, order, and virtue, the Western world now wades through confusion. Values are redefined, truth is treated as subjective, and cultural institutions are driven more by consensus than conviction. This moral erosion leads to political indecision, military hesitation, and a fragmented society incapable of unified action. When a civilization cannot even agree on what it stands for, it cannot stand effectively against an enemy that knows exactly what it believes. The West attempts to project strength through technology, wealth, and influence, but beneath the surface lies a spiritual vacuum. Entertainment has replaced discipline, Tolerance has replaced truth and self. Interest has replaced sacrifice. In contrast, Iran cultivates a culture where suffering is honored, where death in the name of a cause is seen as promotion to paradise, and where obedience to God ranks above comfort or even life itself. That level of commitment is alien to a West increasingly unwilling to endure hardship for anything eternal. This disparity becomes most visible in moments of confrontation. While Western leaders debate, delay, and negotiate based on shifting political winds, Iran acts with resolve born of theological purpose. It may be flawed, even dangerous, but it is focused. Iran's enemies hesitate, but Iran's leaders move forward because they believe they are backed by divine mandate. It is not just strategy, it is sacred duty. The West often underestimates the power of moral conviction because it has largely lost its own. Without a transcendent anchor, societies drift. Without shared truth, nations divide. And without courage rooted in faith, superpowers grow soft. Iran, for all its external vulnerabilities, is internally fortified by belief. That belief is not shaken by threats, sanctions, or isolation. It is passed down, preached, and defended with unyielding passion. This is the true battlefield, where one side fights for comfort and diplomacy, and the other fights for destiny and eternity.